Rafiq Burhanuddin, Senior Research Officer at IKIM. In the previous episode, Dr. Adi Setia has shed light on the position of Islamic ethics and its profound relationship with the sciences and knowledge in general. Thus, his approach on the subject of Islamic ethics in engagement with life, health, and medicine, which is due to be published as a chapter in a forthcoming book on Islam and biomedicine, adopts a philosophical take based on Islamic first principles rather than the dominant legal reactive responses to the developments in modern Western medicine. It is a more reflective and critical take on how the intellectual tradition of Islam can and should engage with the foundational aspects of modern Western medicine. While scientists today do speak of ethics, Dr. Adi cautioned us that if we are not careful in distinguishing the various schools of ethics, we can end up with a rather self-serving approach instead of the traditional virtue ethics as adopted by the learned Muslims throughout the ages. Hence, Dr. Adi calls for a return to virtue in all discussions in science and medical ethics specifically. And this implies knowing the basic terms in relation to life, health, and medicine, especially in light of the challenges we face due to the dominant biomedical paradigm in modern practice of health and medicine. Dr. Adi, if we can begin by looking into the very notion of health itself, something that you've alluded to in your article. How would you clarify on how the Muslims of the past, in the classical Muslim works, understand the notion of health and how different it is from the modern day understanding of it, say, perhaps as upheld by the World Health Organization? Please, Dr. Adi.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma rabbana shrah lana surana sirran umurana kafirana sayyatina. Alhamdulillah, that's a good question. Islam recognizes that man is an integration of body and soul, right? So health in Islam is basically divided into two: bodily health, right? So the siha badaniya and spiritual health. So siha rohaniya. So in the past, the Muslim writers or doctors who wrote on medicine, although most of them have written on bodily health, in the sense of tip, the science of tip or Islamic medicines, focuses on bodily health, but even within that corpus of tip, there is profound recognition of the spiritual dimension of health, and there are even books written on the topic of tip al-ruhani, meaning the tip of the spirit or the tip of the soul.
Yes.
But so anyway, so spiritual health is more specifically talked about in Islamic psychology, and especially in the science of tasawwuf. The science of tasawwuf, for example, the ihya, the last two quarters of the ihya is basically about spiritual health. But here we are focused on bodily health. I mean, the tip as such is more focused on bodily health.
Yes.
So basically, tip medicine qua science of is defined as as a vocation. So it's not just like a profession. A vocation is bigger and more holistic than a profession. So it's defined as a vocation. So a vocation is both a professional calling plus also is a spiritual calling. So there is a spiritual purpose behind that job or that profession, and it also has that social dimension of fardu kifaya, right? So anyway, so tip has been tip as medicine concerned with bodily health has been defined as a vocation that uh, as a vocation that is about preserving and restoring the bodily health of the patient. So it's about preserving, like before the body gets ill. So tip is about prevention or preserving the state of health. So the state of health is considered the default, I mean the normal state of affairs, and then it's part of tip to preserve that, right? And should disease or illness before the body, then of course, then the next stage is a restoration of health. So and then what is health? So health here in relation to TIM is defined as as a state of equilibrium, a state of moderation and balance, mizan, in the bodily functions and movement. So specifically, aseha is the condition of the body when all its functions follow a normal course, and disease or illness is an abnormal condition of the human body which causes harm to the body's function. So to summarize, health is the state of functional integrity of the body. All right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adi. But would you say this, to what extent has the modern notion of health departed from that notion? It seems, from my limited knowledge, is that it seems to be closer to what an alternative notion of health is being. It seems closer to an alternative notion of health, say, that is being discussed in the more integrative so-called medicine espouses. Is that something that we should, students and those in the field should seriously reconsider their very notion of health, as per your article?
Yes. So the classic Islamic understanding of health is closer. In fact, it's very much in line with what is now called integrated and complementary medicine. Right. So broadly speaking, the Islamic conception of health and illness is closer to, let's say, Chinese traditional medicine and Unani medicine that is quite active in India, and in the West you have a naturopathy and also various schools of integrative medicine in the West, and there is a trend towards a more holistic understanding of health as the functional integrity of the body. Right. So as regards how is this different from the conventional, is that, well, the conventional understanding is quite recent, especially post 1920s onwards, and especially so post World War II, where when now, I mean, the current hegemonic paradigm is the biomedical paradigm of healthcare, which focus on the biological or the microbiological aspects of the disease, right? To almost the exclusion of all other factors. So the current biomedical paradigm, which is the dominant and which hegemonic, because especially the worldwide institutional structure for medicine. Anyway, the biomedical approach is overly preoccupied with singular underlying pathological factor like a germ or a virus, or so it's focused on understanding the microbiological processes of some pathogen seen as the cause of the disease, and then how to neutralize the pathogen. So the biomedical paradigm can also be called is also a kind of what we may call a pathological reductionism, right? Reduce illness to some singular pathological factor.
Yes.
And that's what and then the second thing is focus on synthetic pharmaceutical drug intervention to remove the disease, or to remove to the pathogen, rather than natural or simple or less interventive treatment protocols, which in many cases are much more effective, much more safer, with little or zero adverse effect. So there is a systemic exclusion of any treatment of any alternative treatment protocols that are not in line with the biomedical framework. And therefore, the result of that is that the focus is on treatment. The focus is on treatment and management of the disease, rather than long-term healing. So there's a difference between treatment or management and healing, right? So healing has more to do with just getting rid of the pathogen. And then because of that, and then because it's focused on synthetic pharmaceutical drugs, so there is a lot of commercial vested interest in the invention of drugs, because drugs can be patented. So there's not investment in patenting drugs, and right. And anyway, so that's the main difference between the biomedical and the more holistic medical approaches. So, right. but now there is a big reaction, even in the West. So there's a big movement towards a what is called a biopsychosocial framework for illness, and the fact that an illness is more than a disease. Sometimes a person can be ill without any physical disease or pathological symptom, and sometimes the person can still be ill and still be sick, even in the absence. Even if the even if the even when the pathogenic factors are removed. So there's a whole lot of discussion here.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. I think on that point, Dr. Adi, I think in your article due to be published in a book on Islam and biomedicine, you basically demonstrated how perhaps the current hegemony of biomedical paradigm ought to be sort of engaged with the insights from the great scholars of the intellectual tradition of Islam, and from our reading of the articles that you break down how this engagement is to take place, and you basically divided it into the fact that we need to be aware of our axiological commitments, teleological commitments, cosmological commitments, and ontological commitments. Now, I know there's a lot to unpack over there, perhaps can you perhaps shed light or try to guide us in terms of why this approach is necessary for us to deal with the hegemony of the biological paradigm, and yes, basically what you tried to do in this article.
I mean, see that okay. The thing is that okay, first what is meant by axiological commitment is or teleological commitment is what I meant is commitment to value, commitment to interest, and commitment to purpose, right? And so that means that in practice, we cannot separate between intellectual integrity or scientific integrity, which is like which about knowing something that leads to a reliable, integrated knowledge that has integrity. I mean, that is supported by evidence, by argument, by proper analysis, and moral propriety. Right? Moral propriety meaning a proper attitude, a proper response, and a proper commitment, and a proper comportment in response to what you know. I mean, how should your action be guided by your knowledge? So so accelerated commitment here means we integrate between intellectual integrity, meaning that has that our knowledge has to be based on objective evidence. So that's intellectual integrity plus moral propriety or ethical propriety. So that's both there. So these two basic values are important: cognitive value and ethical value. And therefore that leads to, and in practice that means that medical research and treatment and so on has to be more about appreciation rather than manipulation. We have to appreciate and understand how the body functions. We have to appreciate and understand the subjective feelings and states of the person, because an illness is very personal, and it's unique to the person. Like two guys may have the same symptom, but their respective individual experience of that sickness is unique to that person. So the doctor must appreciate that and not just treat a patient as just another statistic, right? And and that impacts a lot on how we conceptualize evidence. What are the so-called evidence-based medicine? What counts as evidence? And so anyway, so and that's why a return to original and more holistic medical virtue is important, because the original classical medical virtue takes into account the integration between intellectual integrity and moral propriety, or the integration between cognitive value and moral value, right? And then this will have lots of practical implication on methodology, on procedure, and also on the relationship between the doctor and his or her patient.
Yes, and in fact, in this part on your article, you drew the reader's attention the fact that the Muslims had in fact a genre on that falls under this, which is called Adabul Tabib, and we see that what you try to do in this this discussion on axiological commitment is trying to shed more light on the significance of the notion of adab within a more comprehensive context. Can you perhaps just very briefly, I mean, how does adab fits into this axiological commitment
Ah.
in this context.
Yeah. So basically, adab here means okay, in this case, adab towards medical knowledge, right? And then adab mean adab as a proper comportment,
Yes.
proper relationship to all the factors that relate to the relationship between the doctor and the patient. And that's why it's much more than just simply by bioethics. It's not about the ethics of the profession or the ethics of how to use or not to use, or whether to use this or that particular technical intervention. It's
Right.
bigger as to first on this side, first the doctor has to, of course, there is a understanding the vocation of medicine, the technique, but also understanding the patient as person,
Yes.
and as unique and as unique individual with subjective states, with subjective experience, which has a reality. I mean, at least at the psychological level, right? So your patient cannot be treated as a statistic, right?
Right. Right.
For example, that I mean, just last week, I was in discussion with a doctor and asking about adverse reports of certain drugs, and he said, well, the reports are there, but the numbers, he said the numbers of actual harm are very few. But then if a doctor is stuck in the biomedical paradigm, there would be systematic belittling of reports of adverse effect. That be like a systemic ignoring or downplaying, right?
Right.
And so I mean, anyway, so and that's not adab. I mean, that's so a lack of respect to the patient as a person, and also the physician as a person with moral agency. So that means the relationship between the doctor and the patient is I mean, Islam, we call it is based a lot on personal ijtihad, based a lot of course, it based on personal study, research, and clinical experience, right? So it's much more than statistics reported in medical journals. Because the statistics are maybe there, but how some particular statistic relate to that particular patient that you are treating, that's another dimension. So anyway, so adab has so the adab here has to take care of that unique person to person relationship, and not to reduce the patient to some data, because a person is not it's not a homogeneous fungible commodity. They are not just like so many pounds of flour or rice. A person is unique, and the experience and the process and the problem by which a illness take place in a person is different, despite similar outward symptoms. So adab means to be sensitive to such unique variables, and to build on your experience, your total experience, rather than depersonalized statistics.
Yes.
Right.
That-
So
yeah.
and therefore it's more about so summarize, adab is more about appreciation over manipulation, and it's more about a medicine being a virtue-driven vocation over rules-driven profession, right? So it's virtue-driven vocation over rules-driven profession.
Okay, Doctor. Unfortunately, due to limitations of time, we need to hopefully continue to another episode. Perhaps to conclude on this particular one, there is a point which I thought is very fascinating, because it that you mentioned in your article, because it deals with a very perhaps new problem pertaining to the divergence of between techniques and ethics, which you said have become very acute. And this is still on the that very point of the being aware of your axiological commitment, and so I was wondering whether perhaps just to shed light a little bit more, how this question of axiology adapt and how you try to address this question of the divergence between techniques and ethics, which has become so acute. And I think you mentioned the example of the current era of big data research in science tends to overlook the reality of ethics concern. You mentioned something a little bit there, but perhaps you want to share something before we conclude,
Right.
Doctor. Yeah.
So the basic thing that we need to understand about techniques is that all techniques, without exception, all techniques, all method, all procedures are but ethics in action. Right? Techniques are ethics translated into action, into procedure, into methods, and methods can result in physical tools, instrument, technologies, regardless of whether the physician or the scientist or the technologist or the technician is or are not aware. Right. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the thing is that one of the problem with bioethics is that when we look into the origin of bioethics, it became a standalone discipline tied to the rise of the biomedical paradigm in the early 70s, right? Because I think it was in the early 70s that the biomedical paradigm became really dominant, and it was in that context that that bioethics as a discipline to justify the biomedical ban in medicine. And again, and the rise of biomedicine is a direct result of the rise of biotechnology and genetic engineering, which in turn is a result of the discovery of the structure of the DNA. So the discovery of the structure of the DNA in the 60s resulted not in more acquisition, but of the microbiological complexity of the body, but more manipulation, right? And therefore, bioethics were kind of concocted to kind of to moderate the game, right? So it's more about the rules of the game. Do not go too far, right? But so anyway, but the original medical ethic is quite okay. It's more holistic. It's driven by virtue rather than to offset the more negative approach of the utility of biotechnology. So basically, so to conclude, I mean, we have not much time to. I'm not dismissing bioethics altogether, but what you need to do is to revive the original, more holistic, virtue-based method ethics, and bioethics and ethics must be critically reintegrated into medical ethics as a larger or as an overarching ethical paradigm, in which bioethics is only a subset, and bioethics must be governed by the larger overarching virtue-based medical ethics.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been with us on Shaping Tomorrow with Dr. Adi Setia for part 3, in fact, of his discussion on Islamic ethics in engagement with life, health and medicine. Inshallah, we'll be continuing in the next episode. Thank you once again, Dr. Adi. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.